Hi, I'm your host, Danny, founder of Optivide. At Optivide, we support people in solving the climate problem with financial confidence. In our podcast, we will bring climate stakeholders to share one climate solution they are working on to make our world a better place. In today's session, we will talk about coral reefs. Coral reefs are home to colorful fish, sea turtles, and other marine life. With its renowned biodiversity and beauty, many ocean divers are drawn to coral reefs. Nonetheless, it is dying rapidly at scale globally. As a climate stakeholder, how can we mitigate the problem? In today's session, let us introduce Yusuf and Zachary. Hello, Yusuf. Hello, Zachary.
Hey, how you doing?
Hello.
Nice to have you with us in today's podcast meeting. So to start with, we would love to learn about your personal background and why it brings both of you to start the CoralX Foundation.
So my name is Zachary Kane. I'm here with the CoralX Foundation. A little bit about me is I've been born and raised in the United States. I grew up down in Tampa, Florida on a little island called Englewood. And I was in and around the ocean for most of my life when I was growing up. I wound up moving up to Cincinnati, Ohio, of all places, for college. That's where I earned my undergraduate degree, a place called Xavier. While I was there, I started a company alongside another friend of mine where we found the Yeti or Hydro Flask water bottles, those stainless steel vacuum insulated bottles. We backsourced their supply chain. We found the factory in Jiangsu City, China that made these bottles. And we found out that they sold, if you ordered in quantities of over 1,000, from $4.50 roughly. So we were like that. Our minds were blown. It was crazy. And we bought as many of them as we could. We spent our life savings on these bottles. And we used the proceeds as we sold them to build wells in Africa and Uganda. That company was called We Are the Ripple, and it sold to venture capital for several million just a few years ago. After exiting that venture, I went into a leadership development program in the corporate world at a large fintech company. As insightful as working at scale as that was, I missed the passion and love of doing something that mattered and resonated deeply with me. So my story with CoralX started at that point where I went back to the thing that I loved, the ocean, and I just started reading and learning everything I could. And I wound up messaging hundreds of people on LinkedIn. And I made a new friend, Yusuf, who's on the call with us here today. And that day over the internet, we clicked. And here we are 2 months later with an organization and a heck of a story to talk about. And we're really excited to be here. But that's a little bit about me and how I got to be where we are today.
So a little bit about myself. So my name is Yusuf Shahata. I am the other co-founder of the CoralX Foundation. My background is in academia, in research, and that's kind of how me and Zach clicked. We had an opportunity where I was showing my work at the California Academy of Science, doing algae symbiote identification through eDNA. And once doing that, we kind of started speaking about the oceans and all the problems that are occurring. I myself always wanted to make the largest impact as possible. And so my background in research consists of doing DNA replication for the peripheral nervous system, working at the United States Department of Agriculture, doing genetic work with maize and corn, doing virology work, studying how diseases impact livestock all throughout the globe. And the biggest impact so far has been coral, a species that is generally not focused on and is out of sight and out of mind majority of the time. But little do a lot of people know, it is the lifeblood of our planet. It's one of the fundamental aspects of our oceans, and it supports millions and billions of people financially as well as economically.
And how we got there was a story or a practice in responding to a problem. And what that problem was, what we saw as we continued to not just talk amongst ourselves, but to network with individuals across the world in the coral restoration community, is that there were gaps and holes and people who were doing work on the same beach, saving and trying to restore the same reefs or sister reefs, and that they had no idea in some cases about some of the projects that were being done on those same locations or in those nearby neighboring sites. And in addition to that, there was research done all over the world every day, not just in some of the top Ivy League schools, but in universities and off of beaches and around APAC and in the Red Sea, all over, information that sometimes get lost in the fog and in the haze. What we saw was a gap in connection and a missing hole in data unification. And that's what CoralX started to exist to solve or to bridge the gap of. We support coral restoration groups all over the world. We have over 60 partners that we worked with just last year in our first year of operations. And we responded to that problem by prioritizing impact over profit. As we continued to grow, both in our impact, our scale, our team, and even our product suite, we're considering other options, and we may expand into a social enterprise and a hybrid model at some point. But at our core, we care about impact over profit, and that's why we're here today.
I see. You know that recently I just read through some research, actually from PADI, the Professional Association of Diving Instructors. They've mentioned that currently we have already 25 million certified divers around the world, and we're adding additional 1 million new scuba divers every year with these certifications. You do have mentioned about there is a disconnection between the research institution, but on the other side, it seems like people are attracted by the ocean ecosystem and they would love to explore the beauty of the ocean world. So would love to learn that how CoralX Foundation vision or trying to connect between these two different groups of people in order to create a positive impact.
I think it's funny you bring up the PADI certifications and the new 1 million divers that are being added because you have one of them on this call. Yusuf, why don't you talk about how you fit into the story here?
Yeah, and so to that point, I myself, back in October, was able to get a few of my certifications, and so currently have the second certification, which is the Advanced Open Water Diver, going down 30 meters, which is equivalent to about 100 feet. Was able to actually acquire that down in Dahab, Egypt, which is I believe being nominated for a World Heritage Site right now for a protected area due to the sheer beauty of the coral that's out there and the magnitude of the coral that is currently there, that it's very preserved compared to other locations. But to your question, and really my biggest reason getting it is coral are gorgeous, right? We never really understand what we have until it's all gone. And not every day are people able to go to the ocean and just go and swim, right? Generally, for leisure activities, people like to go out swimming. But like you said, more people now are wanting to go and venture deeper than just a surface level. And we never really think about the beauties that are within the seas and all the way to depths of 100 feet or 30 meters. And that's really kind of what captivated me to get the PADI certificate, because like you said, it's internationally known. You can go anywhere, get your dive gear, and go see something cool. After, of course, paying a little bit of a financial stake to get to those certificates, but something that you can't really replicate at all.
I see. Thanks the personal story sharing and how you receive the PADI and connect to the work that CoralX Foundation is working on. So, I think most of the people in nowadays knows that coral reef is rapidly disappearing due to the climate change. And I believe that it is one of the problem that CoralX Foundation is trying to solve. So could you tell us a little bit about the work in the CoralX Foundation?
Definitely. So currently the problems that we are trying to solve, and Zach was referring to a little bit ago about the knowledge gap. Many organizations don't speak to each other for one reason or the other, based off of funding or based off of pride to want to excel in their own work. But that's kind of the diminishing factor between all of us. Organizations need to communicate with each other to know what things have already been done and to add on to them and improve on them. Because, like you said, they're dying at an exponential rate, and we really need to all put our minds together in one centralized place to actually push them forward, instead of a lot of the grassroots organizations out there, including some of the 60 organizations that are really just wanting to go out and make a change. And so what we've seen and the problem that we've been able to solve and remediate is the communication between these organizations, as well as the data that is in there. Right now, there isn't a centralized system for tracking impact and best practices. Yes, there are big organizations like the CRC, PORDAP, and groups that are well funded that do interconnect other groups, but not to a point of collecting data like our annual report that we have. Gives metrics exactly of their successes, of their failures, of where they need help exactly, and having a world view of the status of coral currently right now and the status of those organizations within. I think I'll go ahead and give Zach a chance to add some more of those problems that we're bridging.
Sure. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Yusuf. So Danny, you touched on it exactly right. Right now, reefs are at risk of collapsing. The oceans are changing at very fast rates, just as many environments and ecosystems around the world are. And just like humans, as an example, we only thrive between 97 and 100 degrees. We don't really do well outside of that little range. Coral operates in the same way. They have, regardless of species, a set range of temperature where they can thrive and where they can adapt and excel and survive. We're starting to see ocean temperatures change and sometimes grow beyond that temperature threshold. And then you see other factors, things like overfishing, things like pollution, disrupting the ecosystem in the normal state of our oceans near the coasts and near our reefs, and they're having trouble adapting to them. While this is inherently heartbreaking, honestly, it's really sad to see these things, especially when you grow up around them, start to disappear and bleach out until you have just graveyards of rock formations, essentially is what they look like once they're dead. You see that in places where you once saw vibrant, lively, almost like rainforests under the ocean, teeming with fish and eels and sharks and wildlife. It's a sad thing to see, but it's not one without hope. And that's what we've seen in our work. There are hundreds, dozens, people all over the world who are ruthlessly dedicated to bringing these things back and giving them a fighting chance. What Yusuf and I have done, what the CoralX Foundation exists to do, is help support those reef champions, those scientists, those heroes that are out there doing the good work, fighting the good fight every day. Yusuf mentioned our reef restoration report. It was one of the first and largest current status reef restoration reports that CoralRes published. In our first year of existence last year, we published it, the 2024 reef restoration report. We had over 60 organizations from 35 countries participate, and it was incredibly well received to the point where we've since presented it at the Reef Futures Conference. We're going to the UN Ocean Conference here this June in 2025 to continue to fight this good fight and make sure that people who are putting the effort into save reefs have the knowledge, skills, and understanding of best practices and of what their peers are doing to make the best decisions, to use the funding they have, no matter how great or small it is, to save reefs efficiently and to make lasting change, plant corals, if that's what they're doing, that will be here 15, 20, 50 years from now, instead of dying after just one. And then beyond that, we're working on new tools, which you might hear about a little bit later on in this call. There's a 24/7 digital coral specialists that we're in process of developing. We have some cool partnerships that are helping drive that tool and that project along. But we're about putting power back into the hands of the reef restoration community and the people who are doing the work. That's what we exist to do, and that's what CoralX is all about.
It sounds like knowledge gap is one of the core problems that CoralX Foundation is trying to solve. And CoralX digital tools is one of the proposed solutions that the team is trying to minimize the problem gap, to invite wider climate stakeholders to join this climate movement. I do would love to learn about the current conditions of the proposed digital tools condition, and if there is any pilot success moment that the team would love to share with us.
Yeah, and so
Sure.
specifically for CoralX AI, what we're seeing right now is, like Zach was saying, it is a tool that can bridge the knowledge gaps within the whole community. Not many people have time, especially the small grassroots organizations, to go and conduct research in their particular region or area to understand the science-backed knowledge that is happening there. With this tool, you're able to go in, ask it any questions related to coral, and it will come and output an answer. Specifically, if a researcher was able to go and do something in that particular region, is what we've done. We've had a few beta testers that have had a chance to actually go in and try the tool, but we haven't had an official beta launch quite yet, because we're currently just doing some internal testing before we put out a beta version for the world to go out and try.
And to clarify and build on a little bit more about what this tool is about and what makes it special compared to some of the different AI tools and chatbots that people are used to, is this isn't an AI integration. This isn't plugged into OpenAI or Microsoft Copilot. This is a tool that our development team and partner students at the University of Iowa State have been developing and coding from the ground up, and it's specifically and explicitly trained on all publications related to coral restoration, and the marine environment, really giving it the knowledge and expertise needed to act as that specialist that, like you mentioned, can really support people who are involved in coral restoration around the world. And so further on, your question was about the status of all of our tools. The 2024 Reef Restoration Report is available online. We'll be sure to pass the link along so we can include it in the description. And then we're beginning data outreach and collection efforts for the 2025 current Reef Restoration Report. So that one will be coming out later this year.
Wow, looking forward when the tools is launched. Would love to know, is it free for like climate stakeholders, or there will be some different pricing plan, depends on the usage?
The Reef Restoration Report was published and open sourced completely for free to everyone in the community and even the public across the internet. With CoralX.ai, that coral specialist chatbot, our intent is to publish it to the coral restoration and nonprofit community at no cost. We're still working out some of our internal development costs to try and make sure that that's possible. So TBD on that one, unless Yusuf, do you have anything to
Yeah, kind of like Zach was saying, our intent and long-term vision is to have it as a free platform. Right now, what we can guarantee is that the beta testing will be free for everyone to go and try. But to sustain the application and see its livelihood and longevity, there may have to be a cost associated with the upkeep of that. If it would be from our donors that could sponsor the hosting and keeping the model trained and up to date with the latest information, or if there might have to be some type of monthly cost for individuals and each active user. But like Zach said, we're yet to figure that out. We're just trying to make the best tool possible to then really make the impact that's really needed.
Right, because like sometimes customers is often different than beneficiaries. And from what we have discussed previously, grassroots organizations who care about ocean regeneration, also as well as academic partners who might use the tools more often than other climate stakeholders. So in order to make like the service sustainable, sometimes we do need some support in financial part. And that's why I do think that it is one area that we could discover in the future, and trying to link between the unit of sales to the unit of impact. If the correlation between these two is positive correlated, then it is able for the organizations to scale up the impact. So like, I've also read some articles like there is a SS United States is not for service anymore. They bring the ship to Florida and break it down and use it as the foundation to restore the coral reef. So I would love to know from CoralX Foundation, if today the project developers trying to use this kind of model that bring the ship to the ocean and use it as the foundation for coral reef restoration. Is this kind of the information that people are able to find it on the digital tools?
That's a good question, Danny. So that wouldn't be included in the Reef Restoration Report. That report was focused solely on active restoration activities, things like planting new corals and outplant onto dead reefs, or maybe even like artificial reefs, is what you're describing. But the CoralX AI tool is something that is trained on any research publications that deal with coral restoration, coral, or the marine environment like that. So I haven't seen any publications directly focus on the use of ship or end-of-life ships being sunk as part of artificial reef use. That is something that, as long as there is some peer-reviewed research out there, it will be and is included in our test environment.
Yeah, exactly like Zach was saying. It's all particularly based off of papers that are currently out there. Of course, as we know, the field is so ongoing that every organization tries to make their own demeanor or own experiment to see what will happen, right? Of course, right now we're at a day and age where we're dying, and so any effort to really say, yes, this works, or no, this doesn't, is very, very important, right? So experiments like this are vital to really understand if this is a feasible outcome or if it's not, if it could be a flop. We don't really know until we really try, right? And that's the importance of going out and experimenting.
Exactly.
A good idea. I do just want to stress again, Yusuf and I aren't the PhD marine biologists, so we can't give the scientific credibility. We connect and bridge the gap between the people who would have the answers to that. We dove into, there was on the topic of news, something that we saw last year that was interesting was there was the huge rise in sea temperature in the Atlantic Ocean and around the Gulf of Mexico or America, whatever it is called right now. And it was a fascinating story to read about. And it dealt with shipping lanes across from America, across the Atlantic into Europe and parts of Africa, where their ships would travel and they would burn. They would have these huge shipping containers and they would burn like the cheapest tar, bottom of the barrel oil that they had. Oil that was burned would release sulfur dioxide into the air. And Danny, as you know, sulfur dioxide is deadly. You don't want to be around. So there's a big pushback from climate activists who were like, "You're killing fish, you're killing birds. You can see this from space because sulfur dioxide seeds clouds. You can see these trails of clouds that follow the shipping lanes. This is terrible. We need to stop it." And the governments and world leaders responded to the science and they said, "You know what? You're right. We need to ban the burning of this bad oil and we need to burn clean oil, clean energy." And that restriction was put in, I think, in 2018 that every ship had to be compliant by 2023. And 2023 came, people followed the directive and started burning cleaner oil. And all of a sudden, the thing that no one thought of at the time or that wasn't considered was those clouds that were created by the sulfur dioxide of that bad oil, essentially. They seeded clouds, and when that bad oil was stopped being burned for cleaner sources, those clouds disappeared. And clouds reflect sunlight. So that sunlight that used to get shot back into space was now getting absorbed by the oceans, which is part of why you saw those Atlantic Ocean and those Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America temperatures start to shoot back up faster than other ocean temperatures around the world. So that like geoengineering piece and there's that news it's fascinating things to watch. But that was a story that really gripped my attention for part of last year. That I still think is quite fascinating.
Yes, sometimes because like we live in an open, complex ecosystem, and every action we take will change another part of how our nature operates. It's a very new findings, and happy to follow up with all these information and see how scientists or climate stakeholders are able to find a better solutions together, not just for health of coral reef ecosystem, but in general to solve the climate change problem as well. You know, data-driven decision-making process is extremely important. It helps us to make the most effective decision makings when we have limited resource. And biodiversity is one of the topic that often is unvalued or undervalued. So it is hard, especially when our current monitoring technologies is not in place and require more understanding of our ocean ecosystem. We do need this kind of data collection process and continue the work instead of just stopping right here. So speaking to the data-driven process, I would love to learn like from the CoralX Foundation starts, is there common myths about CoralX Foundation that people often talk about that you aware that this information is not that right? We should provide the correct information in order to invite wider stakeholders to join. Yusuf, would you love to share some thoughts on this?
Yeah, so a common myth in the industry in general is only scientists can help. That's not true. It's far from it, right? Many people can help. Businesses, governments, and volunteers play roles all around, from conserving your plastics to just learning generally more about the reefs that are near you if you're by the shore, to businesses supporting these organizations, supporting conservation, being mindful of where they put their where they put the rubbish, where they put this trash, and different methods, what kind of materials that they use in a business standpoint. For governments being much more mindful about how things are shipped, how things are tossed, and another piece to that is particularly for a point that Zach brought up earlier is restoration is just planting coral. That's not true. There's a lot that goes into it, right? Our annual report, showed that about relatively 70% of coral that were outplanted in the first few years end up dying afterwards, right? And that's two factors like long-term monitoring, ecosystem management, understanding what the current environment is, how many times are you going to check on the reef, and what measures are being put into place to keep that survivability higher.
Right, right. So you do mention that earlier in this meeting that you're currently working on eDNA, and I do believe that eDNA is one of the topics that has the potential to integrate with general public through ecotourisms. Would love to learn if there is any project or stories you would love to share with us. And
yeah, to answer your point, eDNA in particular is it's a very interesting topic for a few reasons. What current methods are, we've gotten so good in the medical sector just recently within eDNA and processing things like that, especially with a new integration with AI and fast tracking workflows at these processing facilities, that it's very easy to go collect the sample out in the wild, out in the real world, and then ship it to a lab to then get processed in less than, in a few days, depending on how quickly you can ship that. Citizen science can be crucial, but it really takes building that network and building that knowledge base for people to actually want to do it, right? Not many people want to go out of their way to collect samples like that or get things that are beneficial for the general population in the world. But of course, people do get busy. But to your point, creating that infrastructure, and if there are easier ways to collect that eDNA, it would definitely be a valuable asset to everybody.
Right. From your perspective, because like we know globally, there are 25 million certified divers. If it is possible that every time when they visit to one place and before they start to have their ocean exploration, is it possible that we just provide them, each person, a tube or a small device to collect the data or information to help the scientists to conduct the research or even to help to restore the coral reef, if that's possible, or it actually requires more preparation to actually help push this movement?
I think that that's a brilliant idea right there. I never had thought about that, but utilizing the network that's currently in place could be beneficial. I would envision a point where within the normal scope of teaching the course of teaching how to dive and just really kind of the whole course of scuba in general, it would be essential to include at least maybe a 10-15 minute piece on citizen science and really getting things like that. I don't know the long-term feasibility of it or the pipeline outwork, but it really could be a piece depending on the location that you're diving that some tubes are provided to each dive shop to then go in and collect samples from whatever location that you're currently at.
I see. Right, there's several possibilities that we could combine each different part, not just like eDNA, citizen science, ecotourisms, together to protect and regenerate the coral reef ecosystem. So I'm a bit curious about like for CoralX Foundation, how do you define if the proposed solution is success or not?
It's a good question, Danny. So what CoralX does to bring us back to our purpose and where we started is we bring data and knowledge to the hands and make it accessible to restorators around the world. Our metrics for success internally are expanding our network of partners and collaborators on projects like the Reef Restoration Report for the Coral Specialist digital chatbot. It's getting and growing its daily user base as it moves towards its beta launch and then eventually its public launch. We don't provide pass-fail grades to our restoration partners. We simply tell the story that the data provides us as to how successful different methods are, as to how successful different species are in terms of their survival rates over time, depending on the region that they're planted in and the varying conditions that are found there. We provide opportunities too for our partners to explain extenuating circumstances that may lead to higher or lower survival rates than the mean or the average that we see on the region or in the country that they're operating in. And there's some really cool stories of not just the coral planted, but we get information on volunteers engaged. Different groups have different purposes, and we have to respect and understand that. And we try and tell that story when we're in our report generation phase. Some people engage with coral too as like a byproduct of their initial work. I've got two of our partners that I really love. One of them, the guy's name's Daniel. He's out on Oahu in Hawaii. He works with a dive shop, and he takes people down and teaches coral restoration monitoring and helps people learn how to measure the reef and the growth of coral, how to identify different species. Then they have cool tools too that anyone can go and do, even if you don't have any open water diving certificates or anything like that, where you can go and take pictures of the sea turtles, their tails and their heads, and their computer systems use machine learning to identify the patterns of the scales, I guess, on the back of these turtles, and they're able to identify and track these turtles as they grow up throughout their life. It's a really cool example of using citizen science. Another partner that blew me away is a guy named Dr. Herman Mendez down in Cozumel in Mexico. And he also works at a dive shop. That's what we found with a lot of our grassroots organization partners is they use citizen science and tourism to help drive the funding to do the work that's important to them. So Dr. Herman, he uses just about every restoration technique under the sun. He has nurseries out in the water, electrolysis, growing calcium carbonate down under the water. He has coral spawning in his lab, all sorts of really cool techniques. And then he invites tourists and people on cruise ships to go tour and learn about the ecosystem around them and the work that he's doing. But in addition to that, a really cool element of his story is this is a guy who just loves the ocean, loves his hometown coral reef, spends his day and night trying to save it. And then they built this huge cruise ship port out off the coast of Cozumel so that they could bring in new ships and generate the economy, boost the economy by driving tourism. The cruise ship port destroyed a section of the reef and really had a detrimental impact for a long time. That's part of what drove Dr. Herman to do this work and to really focus on the coral side of things. After they reached stability on that reef and got back to a point where things were starting to look positive again, proposals came in to build a second cruise ship port off the same reef. And this time, Dr. Rahman and a host of locals in the community came together and they fought it in court. And they won. They beat the cruise ship companies in a case based on the fact that there were protected species mangrove trees on the coast where they wanted to build this port. And they said, the judge came down and said, you cannot build where these protected species are and destroy this ecosystem. It's too critical. It's protected and it's vital. And then a day later, or some days later, in the middle of the night, a group of people showed up at the site where those mangroves were, and they sprayed Roundup all over the trees and they killed them. And then Dr. Herman, in addition to running his dive shop day to day, in addition to running and introducing tourists, people from around the world who were visiting his reef, teaching them about it and the work he's doing to save it, he started having people plant mangrove trees with him to help revive that ecosystem and keep it safe. I had the privilege of planting them too, and it was just a heck of a story and a heck of an example of someone who I really look up to now as like a hero, definitely a coral reef hero, but a really good example of what you just described, people who use citizen science, who use tourism to drive the impact on our oceans, and in this case on our coral reefs and our shore-based environments to do some good.
Yeah, citizen science is one of the way that we might could leverage in the future to protect our ocean ecosystem. So speaking to like solving the problem, would love to know, is there any future challenge that the whole ocean ecosystem are currently faced and need more support about? So like, would love to hear some thoughts from CoralX Foundation. Like when we start to restore coral reef, what are the current or future challenge that still need more support on?
I would say some of the challenges in that there's two really big challenges, right? One would be funding. That's going on globally, right? Some of what the recent news here in the States with some of the executive decisions that have been made to defund groups like NOAA, defund some ocean conservation orgs has really created a bottleneck for funding, and many organizations now have to restructure, even though they were already underfunded. I would say that's a big piece for a problem that's this big. Many minds have to come together, and much resource has to be put in place to act fast, to have really precise decision making and execution, and to combine all of those together. It does cost a substantial amount of money, but that does not outweigh all the good that would come out of doing so on a much larger scale.
I think the second point too is if you take a step out from just the coral restoration groups or the ocean conservation groups in general, a lot of the change that you're seeing in our ocean, the things like dying coral reefs, are a result of larger things at play. Things like climate change, things like geoengineering, these decisions made on tremendous scales, like changing policy of how shipping container ships have to operate, that have these unintended ripple effects, these consequences that aren't priced into the decisions that we make. And right now you're seeing what are some of the initial consequences of this new globalized, tech-driven, consumer-driven world. That's not to say it's all bad. That's just to say that we have to be responsible citizens of this planet in all senses, not just economically, but environmentally. We have to be stewards.
Before we wrap up, we'd love to learn, is there any support that CoralX Foundation would love to share to our podcast listeners? And how could people practice the climate movement in their daily life? So 2 questions. One is any support that CoralX Foundation need, feel free to share with our podcast listeners, and one climate action that our listeners are able to practice in their daily life.
Sure, those are both good, very good and important questions. Many times you'll hear the advice or the guidance with being climate conscious of just being responsible of your carbon footprint, of the amount of one-use or single-use items that you use, how many times you use water and electricity. But with coral reefs, it can be even simpler. Not using reef sunscreen that isn't considered reef safe. It will say it on the bottle if it is. Non-reef safe sunscreen uses chemicals that are damaging and sometimes even deadly to coral in the reef. The second is to be very careful when you're out in the water engaging with coral. It can be 1, fragile, but 2, dangerous, where you can hurt, break, and even kill coral. And coral can be very sharp and can hurt and cause pain to you as well. So being respectful of it and not just seeing it as a rock, but as the living, breathing creature that it is. The CoralX Foundation could use help. We're continuing to grow our funding network to be able to provide our tools to the public and to the community for free, but we also offer means for people to get engaged with the coral restoration community. We heard from Yusuf earlier, one of our key pillars is that you don't have to be a PhD marine biologist to make a difference or get involved in ocean conservation. We work with students, interns, and young professionals around the world to manage and run all of our projects. All of CoralX's work is entirely volunteer and support driven. So we are here with opportunities if you want to if you have background in programming, in AI development, if you have background in marketing or in project management, there are spots in CoralX and in our partner organizations and in the coral and ocean conservation community for you. All you have to do is reach out. Everybody needs help, and there's lots of opportunities for you to get involved.
Yusuf, any last words?
I couldn't iterated enough. What Zach said is exactly what we need. We need more people to engage, more people to care, and more people to want to learn, as well as generally stakeholders to understand our vision, to understand what we're trying to provide to the public for free. And if anybody wants to donate to our cause, to excel the AI model, and to support the creation of the next report to really understand what the status of the reefs are globally, that would be phenomenal. But thank you, Danny, for having us, and we appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing what we can all create together.
So for those who would love to follow up with the work, we will attach the information to our podcast description. Free riding problems are a sign of our society's failure. When it fails systematically, which is hard to reverse. Climate change is a growing urgent global problem that will increase the number of irreversible disasters. As a climate stakeholder, if you would love to minimize the free riding problems with collective climate movement, follow Optivide to receive the latest information.